You're listening to a 3CR podcast created in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.
3CR is radical radio, and that means more than just alternative current affairs and political coverage.
We're radical because we're an independent media outlet, owned and operated by the community.
We're radical because we give communities the control of their own shows, with their own music, in their own languages.
We're radical because we provide a media platform for communities to build their own power to create social change.
Become a subscriber and support Radical Radio. Call us on 03 9419 8377 or subscribe online at 3cr.org.au/subscribe.
Evil minds that plot destruction, sorcerer of death's construction, in the fields of bodies burning, as the war machine keeps turning, death and hatred to mankind, poisoning their brainwashed mind.
Welcome to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia on the National Community Radio Satellite. Listen to the Anarchist World This Week, Australia's sacred cow slaughterhouse. Listen to analysis of local, national, international events. Listen to analysis you'll never hear anywhere else.
Welcome to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia, courtesy of the Community Radio Network. My name's Joseph Toscano. This program is coming to you from the studios of 3CR in Melbourne. The program is podcast. You can access the podcast by going to 3cr.org.au. Wonder what anarchism's all about? Anarchos without rulers. What gives rulers the ability to determine the lives of billions of people? Inequalities in power and wealth. So what is the anarchist struggle? The anarchist struggle is about devolving or sharing power, possibly through direct democratic means. It's the struggle to hold wealth in common and use it for the common good. Exceptionally conservative ideas. The Commonwealth being used for the common good. How conservative can you get? So all those of you who think of anarchists as, these, wild-eyed radicals, well, they're just another conservative mob wanting to overturn thousands of years of human history like other anarchists through eons who've always, campaigned against the centralisation of power and wealth. Now, it's interesting, isn't it, living in Australia in 2024, and the phrase that everybody's talking about is doing it tough. You like that? Doing it tough. Every day, every minute of the day, you hear about people doing it tough. And you hear about people trying to do the right thing by assisting people, practically, who are doing it tough. And we find that at the end of the day, that somehow the concept of doing it tough continues to exist and grow and explode. So although we constantly hear about people doing it tough, we're really not told why. Because that's the key, isn't it? I mean, I've been a doctor, for 49 years, and, before you can institute treatment or advise people on options, you need to define the problem. You need to make a diagnosis. Now, the diagnosis depends on the signs, symptoms and investigations you carried out. Now, everybody knows that a lot of people are doing it tough. And the number of people doing it tough continues to grow. But it's not enough just to go in with some signs and symptoms. You need to be able to analyse, to investigate, to find out why people are doing it tough in Australia. Now, I know this is a boring phrase and I say it every week, but 26 million people living on a continent, you wouldn't think that so many people were doing it tough. Now, we're not living in some God-forsaken corner of the earth with no resources and a large population. As I said before, 26 million people living on a continent. And we have a growing number of people doing it tough. Not just people on social security benefits who normally do it tough. That's about 1/3 of the Australian population. But now we're seeing people earning a wage, maybe working 2 jobs, or a couple working 2 jobs, doing it tough. And all these, charities and academics and, good, hearted people tell us how everybody's doing, well, an increasing number of people are doing it tough, okay? So let's look at the reason why people are doing it tough and what can be done to ensure that the wealth that is created available on a continent with 26 million people does not stick on the fingers of a shrinking minority. Because the first thing we need to remember is, although an increasing number of people not on social security benefits are doing it tough, there is a small section of society that has done exceptionally well out of COVID-19 and out of increasing interest rates. And all you've got to do is look at corporate profitability to understand and look at CEO salaries and the salaries of senior bureaucrats to understand that not everybody is doing it tough. That some people are doing exceptionally well, bolstered by corporate welfare, and a fourth of state that never talks about why, the underlying reasons behind particular issues like why people are doing it tough. Well, let's look at the situation. Now, if corporate profits are skyrocketing, if the stock market has reached record levels, if real estate values have never been so overblown, and corporations and some individuals are doing exceptionally well, I think I could do very well on a $5 million CEO salary plus share options, but unfortunately nobody's offered me a job. Anybody out there? Happy to take the job. Well, I'd have to look at what it is first, obviously. And then if you add another 5 million, maybe I'll get rid of my principals. But getting back to doing it tough. So why are we doing it tough? Well, the first thing is that wealth in this country is not equally distributed. You know that, I know that. Every investigation that's been carried out tells us that. The gap between those who have access to wealth and those who live a day-to-day existence is growing. We know that. But why is that occurring? To a significant degree, so many people are doing it tough because representative democracy, the parliamentary system that we labour under, is not in a position to actually pass the necessary legislation to ensure that people living in a country as rich as ours, well, as rich as Australia, I won't say ours, as rich as Australia, don't get their fair share. The fair go society has been the go-go society. And I'm not talking about go-go 60s go-go dancers. So, what we've seen is subversion of the parliamentary process. We now have individuals and corporations that exercise so much power they ultimately determine parliamentary policy. And what that means is they determine legislation that goes through Parliament. And when you have the major political parties supporting the private investment for private profit mantra, espousing the so-called delights of privatisation and globalisation and corporatisation and deregulation, we come to a situation where the parliamentary system is no longer functioning for the benefit of the people of this country, those doing it tough and others. The parliamentary system has become a mechanism via which those who exercise power and those who concentrate wealth in their hands determine what legislation goes through Parliament. So that's the first issue. That's why people are doing it tough. And every time some government attempts to break out of that straitjacket, we see the fourth estate, including all the virtual platforms, light up telling us how it'll be the end of the known universe if that small section of society that owns the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication is asked to cough up a little bit more to ensure that Australians are not doing it tough. Then we have the burden of corporate welfare. That's right. I don't use the word welfare to describe people on social security benefits. The whole point of a social security benefit is a very simple equation. We give you enough to survive on as long as you don't riot and cause, discomfort to those who exercise power and centralise wealth. That's why it's a social security system. It is not a welfare system. But corporate welfare is welfare. It's about governments giving taxpayers money. And let's not forget that the tax base in this country is not dependent on the corporate sector, which pays less than 20% of the tax which is raised every year, but is ultimately dependent on individual tax. It's ultimately dependent on people in the workforce having tax removed from their wages every fortnight. So we've got this dilemma. The taxation system is structured in such a way as to ensure that the rivers of gold continue to pour into the pockets, or should I say, the virtual worlds, the financial virtual worlds of those with wealth, while the rest of us scramble for the crumbs that are brushed off the corporate table. You know this, I know this. But unfortunately, most people in this country are not aware of this. They feel it, they know something's wrong, but there's no analysis. You don't see the fourth estate talking about corporate welfare. Billions of dollars pouring into corporations in order to ensure they continue to create profits for their major shareholders. So there's a second problem, corporate welfare. Why does so much taxpayers' money go into corporations? We don't even ask, as a government, doesn't even ask to have a seat on the board. But if you get a social security benefit, as we saw with the robo-debt fiasco, the criminal activities of robo-debt, which nobody's been prosecuted for, what we see is that corporate welfare is part and parcel of the reason so many Australians are doing it tough. Instead of passing legislation which improves the lives of those doing it tough, all we do is pass legislation to ensure that more and more taxpayers' money, which comes from pay-as-you-earn taxpayers in the majority of cases, flows in to corporations which already make extraordinary profits. And you do it through legislation, you do it through taxation legislation. As the great man, I think it was Mr. Packer said, anybody paying tax in Australia is a fool. Not because he did anything illegally. I'm talking about the daddy, not the current Mr. Packer, but because the taxation laws are so manipulated in this country that if you're a pay-as-you-earn, taxpayer, a wage earner, it gets taken out of your wages. But if you are a corporation, it's a different matter. There's all these wonderful taxation, they're not loopholes. There's all these wonderful taxation laws which ensure that small business gets crucified and that corporate profits continue to soar. So that's the second thing. So you've got a parliamentary system that's been subverted. You've got tons of money going to the corporate sector. And then we have this funny little situation in good old Australia. And it could only happen in Australia. We have legislation which rewards people for investing in the stock market. We have legislation which rewards people through negative gearing changes, that rewards people that have more than one home, but penalises people of increasing interest rates who don't have a home, who have to work, have to rent. What an extraordinary situation. I'm sure everybody around the world would love to find themselves in that same situation. That's the third thing. That's why people are doing it tough, because those with the most get the most tax breaks. It's simple. Then, to me, this is the greatest travesty in this country. Forget about Parliament not being able to pass legislation that helps people doing it tough. Forget about corporate welfare, forget about that. But look at our resources. Theoretically, anything under the ground belongs to the Crown. You may have freehold title to property, but that doesn't give you rights to what's under the ground. And you ask any First Nations person, and they will more than happy be able to tell you what happens in these situations. So, what happens in this country? We have tons of iron ore. We have tons of gas. I think we're both primary exporters of both commodities. We have that wonderful yellow cake, uranium, bauxite, gold, silver, rare metals, you name it, we've got it. We're on the oldest continent. And when I say we, it's not you and me. It's not the government of the day. It's not the state government. It's those businesses and individuals and corporations who've been given licences. That's right, licences by governments to exploit those resources for them, their profits. And when you add this to the pathetic taxation laws we have in this country, you begin to understand why there are so many people doing it tough in Australia today. I mean, it's a little bit like saying to the neighbours, I've got this gold deposit in the backyard. Look, if you'd like to come around with your shovels and dig it up, it's all yours. Just give me 2 or 3% back in return. You know? It's the same concept. Not only are we being cheated in terms of the profits going to the private sector, the fact is that ultimately all these type of resources, whether we exploit them through a publicly owned companies or privately owned companies, the bulk of the profit from the exploitation of these resources would go a extremely long way to ensuring we don't have a housing crisis, that First Nations people have some type of a decent existence, that people on social security benefits don't have to live a hand-to-mouth existence, that we don't have to be paying $1 million for some 3-bedroom dump 20 kilometres from the CBD. Think about it. Why are we doing it tough? Why do we as a people accept this? Are we too busy fighting each other because of our different religious inclinations? The fact that we may wear funny clothes? The fact that my hair is different to your hair? And obviously, while we have a fourth estate, both on virtual platforms and the legacy media, that continues to beat the same drum, we will continue to find ourselves in this situation. So if you're doing it tough, instead of crying in your coffee, isn't it about time that you looked at things in a wider perspective? You're doing it tough not because of any personal failings. You're doing it tough because of the system of government and, more importantly, the economic system which puts private investment for private profit above everything else on the planet. So I encourage you, look around you, see if there are any organisations that are fighting back, that are talking about why people are doing it tough, not just offering stopgap, solutions. And join them. Get involved. Because historically, if you look at the history of the world, it's only when those who are doing it tough stop accepting the garbage which is shoveled in their direction that change occurs. You listen to The Anarchist World this week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. My name's Joseph Toscano. And just in case you're interested, I'm the Registered Officer for Public Interest Before Corporate Interests. You may be interested in joining that particular organisation. I suggest you go to its webpage, pibci.net. You can join online. Let's move on. Life in a 21st century vacuum. Now, I have spoken on this program in the past about a historical vacuum. We don't really know our history. We don't want to know our history. We live in the moment, blah, blah, blah. And obviously that has ramifications. But I want to talk about something a little bit different, which I've noticed becoming more and more prominent as social. You like that? Social problems increase. Obviously, where you don't have a social security system which actually meets people's day-to-day needs, then you will have social issues. You will have increasing personal issues in terms of mental health issues, issues regarding violence within the networks you live in, issues regarding substance abuse. But you see, once again, it's a little bit like doing it tough, you know. It's your fault, isn't it? It's a failing on your behalf that you find yourself in this situation. And I'm just amazed. I'm really amazed. Like I said before at the beginning of the program, I've been doing medicine for 49 years, and you understand the interactions between the social, the medical, the environmental, you know, we're all part of a greater network. We're not just an individual. Remember the old saying, it takes a village to grow a child? Well, we don't have villages anymore. What we have is atomised individuals. Atomised individuals. And if you're an atomised individual, considering the evolutionary, we're social animals, then you have problems. And many of the problems that we face as a community today are not because of individual failings, but are because of the social situation, the cultural milieu we find ourselves in. And that's the other dilemma. It's a lack of investigation. It's a lack of understanding that we are part, whether we like it or not, we are part of a community, we are part of society, we are part of a sovereign nation state. And especially in what they call settler societies, the glue that binds us together isn't a common language or a common culture, but it's an economic system. And if that economic system fails us over and over again, then you're going to have social dislocation. You will have increasing levels of mental health issues amongst children and adults. You will have increasing issues with family and domestic related violence. You will have increasing issues as far as, you know, a lack of purpose is concerned. If you're spending most of your waking hours trying to make enough money to keep a roof over your head, whether it's rent or mortgage, obviously the fact that you're working two jobs, the fact that you don't know whether you're going to meet those financial commitments is going to have an impact on you. And that's not because you're not working hard enough or any personal failings. It's because of the type of life we lead in the 21st century in this country, an atomised life that we live in a vacuum, hoping that some new commodity, some new drug, some new, charlatan therapy somehow is going to solve our issues because they're individual problems. Obviously there are people with individual problems, but ultimately those individual problems are magnified by the social and cultural situation we find ourselves in. I think the important thing to remember is don't beat yourself up because you think it's your fault. Obviously people are driven in different directions for different reasons. And this ludicrous attempt to actually resolve issues which are created by the social and economic conditions we find ourselves in through legislation will fail. And it'll fail over and over and over again, irrespective of the hate and the spite which we see spewed from the legacy media and the virtual media in this country. Just extraordinary. Think about it. Doing it tough, life in a vacuum. We're not atomised individuals. We have been made into atomised individuals with no community and social supports. I mean, the only supports many people have is the support which government or private charities, pay for. It's just extraordinary. It's just extraordinary that we have become so atomised as individuals that we are no longer able as a society to function. You would think that in this country, a sovereign nation state on a continent with 26 million people, that we wouldn't be living life in a vacuum. There would be efforts to create institutions and structures which assist us. For example, I'll give you a simple example, right? Where you marry the doing it tough with life in a 21st century vacuum. Very simple, right? Now, apart from gambling, poker machine venues, pubs, how many social settings are there in this country where you can go, sit down, have a free cup of coffee, have a chat with somebody, right? I mean, a number of months ago, for a number of years, the public interest before corporate interest, we used to have a lunch at a place in Frankston, which basically provided very cheap meals. And you'd see many people on limited incomes come there, have their major meal, and still have money at the end of the week from their pension payments. Now, what's wrong with the government of the day, whether at the state or federal level or even at the council level, with creating these type of institutions around the country, where people who are on limited incomes or social security benefits not only have access to, healthy food, healthy subsidised food. It could become a social centre. But we don't see people moving in that direction. We privatise everything. Because somehow we've come to the agreement as a society that public is bad and private is good. Think about it. Life in a vacuum, life in a historical vacuum, life in a political vacuum, life in a social vacuum, life in a cultural vacuum. It's all about the private investment for private profit mantra. But ultimately, you either accept it or you fight against it. And if we accept it, well, then we deserve what we're faced with. No wonder every time you go into some type of institution, there's a big sign up now, treat our staff with respect. I'm happy to treat anybody with respect as long as they treat me with respect. And the fact is, there is an increasing level of tension and an increasing level of violence in this country. But it's internalised and externalised against other people, not against the very system, the very structures, the very institutions which have created this life in a vacuum and this growing number of people doing it tough. You're listening to The Anarchist World this week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. My name's Joseph Toscano. I'm hosting today's program. If you want to leave messages, 0439 395 489. You can go to Facebook pages, Joseph Toscano, josephtoscano.nar. Public interest before web pages, public interest before corporate interest, anarchistmedia.org, and the list goes on and on. YouTube channels, public interest before corporate interest. Information's there. It's not about a lack of information. It's not about a lack of investigation. It's a lack of a treatment program. I mean, I'm talking about a treatment program to give us the strength to actually push back, to revolt against the type of system which is not only destroying us, but ultimately destroying our children and their children for the sake of creating profits for a shrinking number of people. Now, every human being should be treated with respect and dignity. That's the mantra of all governments, and corporations. Every human being should be treated with respect and dignity. Now, I'd like to make an exception to this. It should be every human being, except Palestinians living in Gaza, end of brackets, should be treated with respect and dignity. 9 months into a genocidal carnage which is occurring in Gaza. 9 months. Well, people are not only being killed in the thousands, mainly men, women and children, but treated, humiliated on an hourly, if not daily basis. Respect and dignity. Respect and dignity. When the world sits on its hands and doesn't say enough is enough, when it's not willing to move from platitudes to actually doing something about it. For example, remember the Korean crisis in the 50s? Australia was involved in that little war. The United Nations was sent into Korea to try to resolve issues. Remember that little crisis? We know the United Nations on the Lebanese border trying to hose things down. But where's the talk about putting troops, United Nations troops, into Gaza to try to contain the carnage? Ensure that Palestinians living in Gaza should be treated with respect and dignity. It's funny, isn't it, in this world how we go about things. Now, we've seen over the last 24 to 48 hours a missile barrage into Ukraine, which has caused a number of deaths, I think over 40, and a fair bit of destruction by the Russians. And obviously, this is something that should be reported. Okay? Fine. And we see it reported. And we see stories constantly about that situation. But what's happened to the Gaza carnage, the Gaza conflict? It's fallen off people's agenda. People have forgotten about the 2 million people and the 40,000 dead who are trying to survive in the most extraordinary situation. And when you look at the media response, it's all about peripheral issues. It's all about, the anti-Semitic envoy, the Islamophobia envoy, It's like saying to people, look at that wonderful little possum in the corner, while ignoring the elephant in the pen, which is squashing the possum. And that's what happens in this country and in the West. What we tend to do is we tend to exaggerate situations which our allies find themselves in and underplay situations that should never have occurred. Now, I understand the bombing of a children's hospital is a horrible thing. Horrible thing. But think about what's happening in Gaza, where hospitals have actually been flattened, where there are no medical supplies, where food, is a starvation level, where people in an area half the size of Melbourne, maybe the size of Canberra, are being repeatedly dehumanised, humiliated and killed. Again, no historical memory. It all started on the 7th of October 2023. Nothing had happened to Palestinians before then. Come on. And that's the dilemma we face. When a population is subjected to the same news, whether it's in the legacy media or the virtual world, where the real issues are shunted aside, then we have the situation we see not just in Gaza. I'll give you another example a little bit closer to home. NAIDOC Week. Now, if I remember correctly, NAIDOC Week is the National Aboriginal and Islander Day of Observance Committee. All right, NAIDOC, NAIDOC, NAIDOC Week, National Aboriginal and Islander Day Observance Committee, NAIDOC. Now, NAIDOC is an exceptionally important week amongst the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in this country. It's been around for almost 100 years. Now, this is considering the loss of the voice referendum. This was the next big thing, right? As far as reconciliation is concerned, as far as people putting forward their particular position, as far as First Nations people are concerned. And there are celebrations, big and small, across the country. So what happens during NAIDOC Week when a lot of wonderful, important events are occurring where the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander are celebrating their survival and their future? So what happens in NAIDOC Week in 2024 in Australia? We see a curfew been introduced in Alice Springs. That's right, middle of NAIDOC Week. Now, obviously, I'm not saying there's no crime in Alice Springs, and obviously the week before curfew was introduced was a particularly busy period because thousands of Aboriginal people congregated in Alice Springs for the show. And obviously, when people congregate, there are issues, crime, the list goes on and on. So what does the Australian media fixate on for this whole week? What does it fixate on? It fixates on the problems and the curfew in Alice Springs, and especially the corporate-owned media. There is hardly any news, publicity, positive response to the huge number of events which have been organised by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, First Nations people in this country, to celebrate their survival and their future. So what we see, as we see in the Gaza situation, as we see it in the Doing It Tough situation, as we see it in Life in a 21st Century Vaccuum situation, what we see, for the sake of advertising, or the sake of a headline, what we see is the sabotage of a week, which is critical not just to First Nations people, but critical to many of us in the community. And that's the dilemma. That's the dilemma of living in the 21st century world. This happens over and over and over again. Now, boys and girls, do you have any money in your back pocket? Maybe 10 million, 20 million, 30 million? You see, there are money laundering laws. Well, they've been introduced recently, for casinos and financial institutions. But guess what? Now, you may find this hard to believe, If I had 30 mil in cash in my back pocket, that'd be, I think, $30,100 notes, if I've got that correct. Yeah, 30,000. I could wander into any real estate agent in this country, put the money on the table and say, I want a nice house with a nice garden and a nice view, preferably in one of the better suburbs of Sydney or Melbourne or maybe even Adelaide or Brisbane. And I want to pay cash today. And guess what? There is no legislation in this country. You're going to find this hard to believe. There is no legislation in this country that says that the real estate agent needs to report this $30 million transaction to the Australian government. So what do you think criminal elements and the corporate world has been doing as far as ill-gotten gains? Laundering it into the real estate market. Why would you bother buying some small business somewhere and trying to launder your money that way, or put it for a financial institution, or go to a casino when you can buy, that's right, real estate and launder your money through Australian real estate? So I know we talk about real estate and the fact that there is a lack of supply, and we all jump up and down about this and that. But the important thing is that billions of dollars of ill-gotten gains over the last decade have been poured into Australian real estate, mainly residential. And I heard a senior officer in the Australian Federal Police, you know, those nice people, say that they have one particular family which has invested $750 million in the Australian real estate, including a $30 million home, and they're on their watch list. Well. Welcome to Australia 2024. No wonder real estate prices have spun out of control. You know, no wonder. Money laundering into Australian real estate. Now, I understand there may be legislation in the offering to try to shut this little loophole, but let's see what happens. Now, last week, you may have seen last Thursday, I think it was, some people jump on the roof of Parliament House and unfurl a few banners. Now, very lucky for the politicians inside that these weren't battle-hardened terrorists who didn't give a shit about their lives. These were peaceful, anti-war activists. And those of you who do listen to Talkback with Attitude, you heard some interviews we did with the people on the roof on that particular day. Isn't it extraordinary? I think this country has about 13 different security agencies. And obviously there's the Federal Police in Canberra, there's ASIO, there's ASIO, you name it. There's increased security around Parliament House. And guess what? A ragtag army of 4 could climb on the roof and unfurl some anti-war banners. Now, obviously they've been arrested, and obviously they will bear the full brunt of the law. But I think this is a great humiliation, a great embarrassment to Australia's security agencies. What would have happened if these were terrorists who didn't climb on the roof of the Parliament House in Canberra with a few banners and a few paper planes, but they had bombs and guns? What a total failure these security agencies are in terms of protecting us. They're very good at harassing people, but when it comes to doing their job, MIA, missing in action. I reckon the 4 activists who climbed on the roof of the Parliament House shouldn't be prosecuted. They should be rewarded. Maybe they should all get Orders of Australia for highlighting for highlighting how ill-prepared this country's security agencies would be in terms of a real terrorist threat, not just a few peace activists unfurling a few anti-war banners on the top of Australian Parliament House. Extraordinary. They get billions of dollars. Couldn't even see this coming. Extraordinary. So congratulations. I need to congratulate these 4 activists and the people that assisted them. Congratulations. 1, for making a point as far as war was concerned on the 4th of July. And 2, for highlighting the Keystone cops that wander around, harassing peaceful activists while opening the door to terrorism in this country. You're listening to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. Now, I thunder, preach against privatisation, all the negatives, but I'll give you another story. And this is the beauty when you listen to the Anarchist World This Week. You get a different perspective. Melbourne Airport, right? For the last 6 decades, they've been talking about building a railway line from the CBD to Melbourne Airport, right? There's going to be, 45 million people use the airport by 2023? It means a lot of people taking a lot of planes. But John Howard, in his wisdom, great man John Howard, lost his seat, only the second Prime Minister to lose his seat at a federal election, privatised all the airports in this country, gave the corporate world a gold card, to make money. Okay? Now guess what? It's private property. So what we have now is a privatisation nightmare. We're a private corporation which now owns Melbourne Airport, one of a critical infrastructure in this country, holds the state government at ransom about what they want and what they don't want in terms of a train line. Now that they acquiesced, the problem is they own the land where the railway station will end. So guess what? They'll be asking an inordinate amount of money. Now, if the place hadn't been privatised in the first place, this rail link could have been built 20 or 30 years ago. So again, another consequence of privatisation. And privatisation, you lose the capacity to create revenue from a publicly owned and a publicly managed facility. And you give that revenue to a private corporation. And last but not least, I'd like to invite every listener in every corner of Australia to join us on the 4th of August. That's Sunday the 4th of August, 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. The West Papuan office, which was created and continues to be supported 100% by the West Papuan Rent Collective, is 10 years old. And on the 4th of August, we'll be celebrating that fact. And the West Papuan office is 838 Collins Street, Docklands. You just come and walk around the back. There'll be a West Papuan lunch from 1 to 2. Dr. Jacob Rumbiak will be speaking about the role the West Papuan office in Melbourne has played in the West Papuan independence struggle over the past decade. We'll also be having a Lewis Liddell speak about how the traditional indigenous system has been subverted in West Papua by the Indonesian government to make us all think that they have been peacefully incorporated into the nation-state of Indonesia. There'll be the famous West Papuan Rent Collective auction, which will include one of the hand-crocheted blankets by our Tuesday Home Times here on 3CR, very own Jan Bartlett. And special guests will be the the Papuan Community Choir. So put it in your diary. 4th of August, great celebration. These are little people. I can assure you there's no Gina Rineharts on the West Papuan Rent Collective list. If there was, we wouldn't be paying rent. We would have bought the bloody office. So it's ordinary people. People on pensions, people who, don't have that last cup of coffee. These are the people that have assisted us to create the West Papuan office, which is instrumental, fundamental in the international West Papuan struggle. So put it on your diary. Sunday, 4th of August. Sunday, 4th of August, 1 to 4 p.m, 838 Collins Street, Docklands. Bring some cash, bring your plastic. Here we go. We're about to disappear. See you next week. Well, I won't be seeing you. You'll be listening to me, and I'll be listening to you if you ring. Here we go.
Evil minds that plot destruction, sorcerer of death's construction.
An analysis you'll never hear anywhere else. Anarchist World This Week. Australia's sacred cow slaughterhouse. 10 a.m. every Wednesday. Listen to the Anarchist World This Week for an up-to-date analysis of local, national and international events.
Poisoning their brainwashed minds. Oh, Lord, yeah.
Are you a 3CR subscriber?
We really need our listeners to subscribe to the station. It helps us remain financially independent and is an important part of our community governance.
It's just $40 concession, $80 waged, $150 for a band or organisation, and $300 solidarity.
Become a 3CR subscriber today.
3CR Radical Radio.
You've been listening to a 3CR podcast produced in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.